Welcome back to the Balterra Wellness Podcast, where we explore the people, ideas, and systems that shape better health, better products, and better leadership. Today, I'm joined by Ed O'Toole, who is the Consumer Insights and Product Development Lead at Reliance Vitamins. At Reliance, he sits at the intersection of data science and real consumer behavior. He leads innovation by translating market insights and emerging trends into clinically supported formulations and successful product launches, working closely with R&D, sales, and marketing to bring ideas from concept to shelf. With decades of experience spanning retail operations and product development, Ed brings a unique ground-level perspective on the supplement industry. He's seen firsthand where the industry delivers real value and where it falls short, particularly when products miss the mark on efficacy, transparency, or true consumer need. At Reliance, Ed plays a key role in developing science-backed formulations, ensuring every product is built on validated ingredients, proper dosing, and real-world application, which is why partners like Balterra can confidently bring high-quality, effective products to market. Today, Ed continues to lead innovation initiatives, host industry-facing discussions, and shape the next generation of consumer-driven supplements. Ed, welcome to the show.
You got it. I like to joke with people that I worked my way down from the top, although the top back in 1989 was pretty small peak. It was an industry that did less than $1 billion and a company that did
Wow.
less than $800,000. But they had a little 21 store kiosk chain, and they recruited me to be director of stores. And I, frankly, at that time, knew nothing about nutrition. Some people now consider me a subject matter expert, but I
That's
knew
right.
a lot about what motivated me. I had been a COO of a pretty decent-sized company and was very unhappy in my late 20s. So I got far fast, but I was unsatisfied. I didn't know why. And one is I may have gotten too far too fast, like just been able to get things that I wasn't supposed to get at such a young age. But part of it too was I had this real yearning to help people that I didn't even fully understand. I mean, the teachers in school and the nuns in school used to talk about a thing called a calling, and I didn't know I had it, or the phone was ringing and I didn't even hear the ring and didn't pick up the phone. So,
Not many of us do.
no, but my absolute passion in life is to help people, and I've not had trouble. I'm not always successful at it. I'm a human like anybody else, but it gives me great pleasure and really satisfaction more than pleasure when I am able to help a person. So uh, the one thing that intrigued me about the company was I had determined for myself. I ran a pretty decent sized sales organization that sold hats and then another one that sold electronics, but I wasn't happy doing that because I can make people happy with a smile on their face for a minute, but it's not the same thing as changing some aspect of their life.
That's
And
right.
so I was recruited to this little company, and they wanted me to go visit 5 or 6 stores and talk to 10 or 11 people, and I did. And I turned down the job because I said, I went to 11 different stores and I got 11 different opinions about how to lose weight. I said to myself, the truth of the human body can be different from one person to another, but it can't be this
That's right.
random. And, you got to understand, this is when I first started talking to them, it was probably June or July of 89. So I turned them down and went back to my other job, which I didn't like. Um, about 6 months later, they go, two things happened. One, the guy we hired instead of you, we don't like him. So we let him go. But the second thing is we loved the reason you didn't want to come work for us. They were wearing white lab coats that went down to their knees. They weren't well trained. And, my dad was a teacher, so I probably should have realized sooner than I was 48 or 49. But at this point, I'm only 30. But I had an instinct for teaching people how to do things. And I thought, well, at least I know how to sell. And they're trying to tell people what to do. And it's really needs-based. And by the way, nothing's changed in 36 years.
That's right.
It's still needs-based, right? And if you can come up with a solution where people experience a difference, they will be your own best advertising. And I'm sure, Jose, that's your motivation for Balterra.
Correct.
So I tell that long story for this reason. It's not changed. What's changed is the amount of information we can get, which one can on one level add to the confusion to the consumer. On the other level can help us really have great insights as to what people need the most help with, where they see the biggest white space or void, and what it is we have to say to them, even if we come up with the greatest product in the world, for them to be able to hear what we have to say. So I think the science is so much more. Now, think about it. We were celebrating, I think in 90 or 91, the first time the industry did $1 billion. Was in the
Mhm.
vitamin shop about, I don't know, about 15 years ago or 12 years ago, they celebrated the first time they did $1 billion by themselves, right? So now I'm out of the retail business. I'm in the the really the contract manufacturing side of the business. And I had developed product for my own company for about 13 years, from 1995 to 2008.
Mhm.
But I wasn't able to scale up. I opened too small a store with too small an idea. And really, the influencer market, people kept telling me to do stuff what you're doing, Jose, back then, and I didn't listen. Turns out I'm stubborn, which my people are kind of known for. Okay. So the thing of it is, now I see, like, wow, we can help a lot of people with really good product. And I always had an instinct, well, what does the data say? What does the clinical data say?
Right.
I was looking up PubMed.gov.us, sharing that with customers who were doubting me, who would accuse me of doing something just for the money when I was making no money. I was like, "Oh, go research it yourself and tell me what you find." And I would lead them in the direction of the only search engine at that time where you could actually look at clinical data. Now think of
Mm.
how quickly, and now with AI,
Amazing.
how rapidly you can accumulate substantial studies and even ask the AI to rank them in quality of study order, right? So you're not
That's
looking
right.
at the nonsense first and weeding through all the weeds, right? So we can
It's
get information
amazing.
so much quicker, but we still have to know what to ask the computer to do. We still
Yes.
need to be able to challenge the AI, because the AI wants to flatter us and tell us what they can look in our system and see what we already believe, right? And they'll give us the ideas that we're most likely to say yes to and call it a day. So you really have to set up the right personality. You have to ask the right questions. So AI is a useful tool, and it's also useful for the customer. This little thing here, I started to notice when I was at the vitamin shop. My cell phone I'm holding up, but I'm
Yeah.
not good at this. So they would come in the store, and I found it difficult over time, except with customers who already knew me, to engage them in assessing needs, because they would go to the store because they heard something. They would look at it on the shelf, and they would go out to their car and buy it. And I said to myself, well, that's going to change everything now. So this little phone, whether you're a brick and mortar store or an online store, um, an online seller, it doesn't matter. This little phone is going to control your life. So you
That's
either
right.
learn how to eat the bear or the bear will eat you. And so the thing of it is, how can we put products out there that they can scan on their phone? So just look at that supplement facts panel and look at it to some other thing that might be a well advertised national brand that doesn't mean equality. They're going
Mhm.
to ask their AI or their search engine to compare the two products and tell them which one is best and why. So we
Yes.
have an even greater onus to do what I've always wanted to do, which is only sell stuff that's not BS, only make stuff that's
Yes.
not BS, that the customer can experience a benefit from, that matches their need state. Now
Now,
the need,
Ed,
yeah,
that brings up a topic that we've discussed in the last 3 podcasts, pixie
right,
dust. What we
right,
call fairy dust or pixie dusting,
right,
and you're getting to that right now. And that topic of a lot of products use insignificant quantities of what they're
right.
claiming to be an active, and that to my perspective or my opinion, it gives that industry a little bit of a black eye. And I think this is where you were going with it. So how do you see that
Oh, that
changing, and how do you see that
that was
improving,
always a
because we
problem
have
for
to?
me. Yeah, the
Hmm.
the word proprietary blend,
Hmm.
what does it say? It say you don't know what's in that. So
Right.
if the product is 2 capsules and they list a few ingredients at less than effective doses, and then they
Right.
list the proprietary blend, and you can see that's the greatest contributor. They have
Hmm.
to list it in rank order, but the first thing they list is usually 90% of it, and all the rest is pixie dust.
Hmm.
There was a company that was trending in the natural channel for the last 4 years. I'm not gonna say the name, but if I say the product, those in the natural channel will know what I'm talking about. They said 100 billion 100 strains. 100 billion 100 strains? You can't fit it in a capsule. So it was
Something's
maybe
off.
eight strains and an 88 fairy dust blend of the other in a fairy dust blend at very, very low quantity, which, by the way, if you went to test it, couldn't even be tested at such a small amount,
Yeah.
right? So, yeah, it gives us a black eye. Now,
And
there was a
uh,
progress. Yes.
tell us about this one a little bit,
Yeah,
if you
turn
can.
turn the SFP on the side. It's 100 billion probiotic, but it only has
Ooh,
how many probiotics in it? You know what I'm saying? Like, we're
yeah.
listing the actual strains of probiotics. We're telling you what it is, and we're giving you full label disclosures. There's not 100
Yes.
strains in there. Um,
Right.
there's probably 12
12,
strains or 11 strains,
12
uh,
strain. Yeah.
and 2 prebiotics to encourage all the other microbiota that are already in your gut to grow at a more rapid rate. The kinds of strains we pick, the kinds of things we pick even for a prebiotic nourish the good bacteria, but they don't feed the bad bacteria. So you create better microbiotic balance. So
Right.
that's what fairy dust is about. It's about tricking the customer. Now, there was a progression from proprietary blend to quote unquote full label disclosure, Jose, but it can be its
Mhm.
own trickery. What they would do is they would have 2 hero actives that might be at an effective dose and 8 other hero actives with a milligram or microgram dose listed next to them, for which there
Mhm.
is no study to show would ever be
That
effective.
that's an effective dose. Correct.
Correct.
Mm.
So what we came with that you're alluding to is we came out with a line starting, I think it was in January of 2024. We
Mm.
wanted to go next level. And ironically, we had already designed the first wave of the line when we got this study from McKinsey and Company that said consumers around the world, and specifically in US and Canada, were really concerned about clinical proof over cleanliness. So for 10 years in the industry, terms like vegan, organic,
Mhm.
non-GMO, gluten-free, those were the primary drivers on a
Mhm.
PDP panel.
Yep.
That was enough to get the job done. But that was only saying you're virtuous. It wasn't saying you were effective. Okay.
Correct.
So what matters more now, and we see it more and more and more, and I think the phone and its quick access to great deal of
AI.
information is the reason
Mhm.
why, is people want to know not only is the right thing in there, but is it at a dose that makes sense with other things at doses that make sense. So we
Exactly.
created a line called the Advanced Support Line. And, I know you're layering in your introduction to stuff, but when you start layering in those, we'll do another podcast about that. But the goal there is to have maybe 3, 4, in one case, 5 actives at clinically effective doses and only trademarked if a trademark mattered. Because if the clinically
Mhm.
effective, like on collagen, you sell a great collagen. The
Yes.
collagen is bovine collagen peptides. Last I looked, which was when I was still looking at .gov, in PubMed, there were over 1,100 studies just on uh, 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 hydrolyzed bovine collagen peptides, right? I'm
Yeah.
sure that number is close to 2,000 now because they're trying to find what does it do at lower doses for other conditions and how low a dose can be effective, right? So I'm sure there's way more than 1,100 studies that I saw 4 or 5, 6 years ago. So it
Mhm.
sometimes it does not need to be a trademarked or clinically studied active. It just needs to be the actual thing that works. And in the case of
Exactly.
and I know you're about to roll out creatine monohydrate. The
Yes.
creatine monohydrate is the same 80 mesh, and everybody's making a big deal about German. Doesn't matter country of origin. Is it 80 mesh creatine? Now, in some cases, there's 200 mesh creatine, which is considered
Mhm.
even more soluble. But that's what matters is the fact of the thing, not what you say about it, okay, or not how you market it.
100%.
Yeah,
100%. And I think that's where consumers need that education, and it's difficult for them sometimes, even with AI and the tools that they have, to access things like that because they need to trust formulators and people who understand how to build a product with the right efficacious doses. So that brings up a couple of questions that consumers really need to understand, and that is you mentioned a couple of things. One, the right clinical. So, what is a gold standard clinical? And two, you mentioned the particular active and the mesh size and the solubility and how that affects that
right.
absorption.
Well,
So tell us a
it's
little
not.
bit about
Yeah, that's
things
not
like that.
always true, but it's true in many
Mhm.
cases.
Mhm.
I'll give you a few examples.
Okay.
One is on creatine. Mesh size matters for how much is left at the
Mm.
bottom, but everything that does get dissolved is still going to be used. The stuff that doesn't get dissolved is probably going to be less likely to be used. So
Yeah.
when you mix your creatine plain with just plain water, you should see the water a little cloudy. That means it's
Mhm.
suspended in the water and you'll be able to absorb it. If you see a lot of particles on the bottom, it means
Yeah.
it's less so. Okay. Now,
Correct.
there are things you can do over time to make things even more highly soluble in water,
Mm.
right? So, but the goal of any nutrient, right, is not just digestion, but absorption, and then ultimately inside whatever cells it functions, assimilation, right? So that's what we're
Yeah.
trying for. A good example of it is, in the magnesium space, magnesium glycinate does much better than citrate and way better than oxide. Why? Because it's actually a relatively small percentage difference, but it's enough to create discomfort. Magnesium glycinate leaves less in the intestinal tract where it could cause stool softening. And, for people who are on the road all day, that could be a problem, right? And a
Yes.
higher amount that gets into the blood, but more importantly, in the muscle, where it actually helps control the muscle stress that triggers adrenal problems that leads to high blood pressure and tension and
Mm.
stress problems and sleep problems. So we try to pick the best form of something. If it's quote unquote commodity, still pick the best
Yeah.
form. And then on top of that, if there is a clinically studied active, and your first question was, what is the standard? The gold standard is for everybody is a double-blind clinical assessment. Now, sometimes you
Yes.
don't always have that, but what you also have is there are population studies over time, and there are also large consumer surveys that can fill in the blank until we get a good double-blind placebo to know if there's an actual difference between two things.
Mhm.
There's a couple of companies out there doing this. They can do the double-blind clinical assessments, but they're doing preliminary studies. I'm thinking of Radical Science
Radical.
and
Radical science. Yeah.
what's the other one? People Science? Something like that. But
Uh,
that's actually a
yeah.
company that developed a methodology for drug companies years ago that they
Mhm.
sold their company, so they can't use it in the drug space anymore, and then bringing
Mm.
it over to our space. So we're working with companies that are doing the real science or have real
Mhm.
science behind it when we select a trademark.
This episode of the Balterra Wellness podcast is brought to you by Balterra Incorporated, bringing trust back into the supplement space. Remember, stay balanced, stay clear. Now back to our show.
Now, over time, you'll see, will sometimes trademarks will rotate out of the rotation. Chromium picolinate, when it first came out, Nutrition 21 owned the
Nutrition
patent.
21.
Actually, it was the USDA owned the patent. Story about that.
Mm.
Chromium was first studied on cows. They wanted to know why the cows in the upper Northwest,
Uh-huh.
Midwest, were healthier and produced more milk and had a lower rate of illness. What they found
Mm.
is they had two things in their blood. One was chromium picolinate and the other was zinc picolinate. Well, it turns out glacial soil, which is very
Yeah.
deep in the Midwest because of all the Great Lakes, um, those cows got more chromium and more selenium. USDA owned the patent and then licensed the patent for many years to Nutrition 21.
21.
But the truth
Mm.
is, anybody can make chromium picolinate now. So what was once very special and trademarked is now
Mhm.
a commodity. So
Yes.
that happens over time. So we're rotating. Right
Mm.
now, we probably have about 70 trademarks in our arsenal to create formulas with, right? But some of them will
Absolutely
rotate
fantastic.
out and new ones will rotate in. Okay.
Yeah, and can we pivot then to something that is a little bit harder to trademark and yet can find its way into the consumer's
Oh,
well-being, which is something like oil of oregano,
right,
right? So understanding the active there on carvacrol and thymol and
right.
understanding why an herbal can be effective for your well-being is something that right now the industry is struggling a little bit because there's not a lot of gold standard clinical studies because it's been used traditionally. There's not a lot of support yet there to push it through and say, let's get these clinicals on herbals like oil of oregano. So you guys have done a fantastic job understanding some of that science and why carvacrol and 70% carvacrol is very important. So if you can, can you elucidate a little bit for the audience to understand herbals, because there is a chance that we need to continue to improve on clinicals, yet there's still a lot of efficacy within a lot
Yeah,
of
well, now you're talking my language because what I actually studied in college wasn't nutrition or biochemistry or even marketing. I studied history and American studies, right? So I'm a history guy. So
All
what you're
right.
talking about now is historic and traditional medicine, right?
Yes.
So when you mention, oregano oil, right?
Hmm.
Or we talk about boswellia, which is actually a
Hmm.
form of a derivative of myrrh. These things are historic. We're about to celebrate a holiday in the Christian world in the next few days.
That's
Uh,
right.
they were given 2 of the 3 things that I know are absolute holistic medicines to the baby the day he was born, right? Frankincense and myrrh.
Right.
So,
Hmm.
they have healing properties and anti-inflammatory properties, and one of them even has anti-infection properties. You'll see it in, tattoo bombs, is the myrrh, okay?
Right.
I know
Okay.
I learned about it from a diabetic who had a wound ulcer that wouldn't heal. He was going to a special
Uh-huh.
burn and wound healing institute here in New Jersey that's world famous, and they
Uh,
couldn't figure out why his blisters kept coming back, and then he would get these terrible infections. One of the doctor's patients came in with this
uh,
stuff called golden sab, and all it was vitamin E, cannabis, and myrrh, and he rubbed it on the wound. Well, it turns out if you go to any tattoo parlor, they're selling some kind of tattoo balm. I guarantee you find 2 of those 3 actives because
wow. Interesting.
it heals and protects the wound. Garlic, this is another
Yeah.
great one. The Greeks taught the Italians about garlic. My Italian friends get all upset with me. In New Jersey, it's a dangerous thing to say, but I'm in a closed room and you guys aren't in New Jersey. But the deal of it is this. Um, Garlic was used by the Greeks and then the Romans, not only in the
Um,
field of battle, but in the field of growing things. When they got a cut, what was the
mhm.
greatest risk of death? Was infection,
Infection.
right?
Correct.
Sepsis. You get a cut in the field and you're working with manures or fertilizer, you could be in big trouble quick.
Hmm.
So they learned in the fields, and they learned later on they could clean the wound with clean water, rub the cracked garlic, which is fresh, right in the wound, and it would cauterize and disinfect the wound. Now, if you watch Saving Private Ryan, 2,000 years later, when the medic gets hurt, what do they pour into his wound? Medical grade sulfur. Now, what makes garlic smell?
It's sulfur. Yeah.
Sulfur. What makes
Yeah.
egg yellows smell?
Definitely
Sulfur.
sulfur.
Right. So if it's rancid cholesterol and egg yellows and garlic provide sulfur, guess what they protect against?
Yeah.
Cardiovascular, concerns around rancid
Mhm.
cholesterol, adhering to the arterial wall or blocking the arteries or triggering inflammation in the artery, right?
Look at
So
that.
these are
Yeah.
all things our ancestors knew, we kind of forgot, right? Uh,
Yes.
One of my mentors when I first got into business, he taught me about 2 things. One was just the general principle of what we're doing. He said he was from a small college in Texas. He said, "Since we've been kicked out of the Garden of Eden, all we've been trying to do is come up with stuff that would make our diet more like it used to be. In other words, make it." And
That's right.
we don't modernity changes the nature of how food's grown,
Mhm.
how it's transported, and even if we wanted to eat right, it was impossible. But our ancestors had some solutions for times of the year where they would be without, right? And, so a lot of these herbal medicines were things they used to solve problems. We know that Ayurveda and Chinese medicine are
Yes.
much older even than the European folk medicines. It turns out that anywhere along the Silk Route, that information would migrate back. So ginger, which is used as, like anybody who's had sushi knows it's a digestive and a bit of an antibiotic, which is why you get pickled
Right.
ginger with sushi or raw fish, right? Or why ginger and turmeric are used in curry. But as it migrated back, it got a new name. They called it Zinzibar. So when it got from
Mm.
along the Silk Route from the east, the northern Silk Route, it went through Germany. So ginger candy, ginger beer were
Uh-huh.
used by first the Germans and then eventually all Europeans to settle their stomach, right? So these
That's
are
right. Real.
historic uses of stuff. And here's the ultimate decider isn't the clinical study. It
Mhm.
isn't the history. I love it. I love the study now. But you know what it really is? Consumer satisfaction. Why
Mm.
does a doctor say when someone's going on a cruise ship, if you do get nauseous, bring some ginger candies with you? Because we know it helps reduce inflammation in the inner ear and helps reduce the nausea sense, right? When I was sick as a child,
Correct.
my mother, who insists none of us were lactose intolerant, told us we couldn't have dairy, but she would give us flat Coke or flat ginger ale to settle our stomachs and get our blood
Right.
sugar. right?
That's
So
right.
there are ancient solutions and there are some recent solutions we forgot about, right?
Love it.
So that's science too, but it's a science based on a great deal of data and consumer
Yes.
feedback. You know, I
Love it.
when collagen first got out, I got to admit, when I first started reading about whey protein, I was taught by blind clinical studies from companies like Sandoz that
Mhm.
whey is the gold standard of protein. Whey is the gold standard of protein. Over time, I came to see that we could approximate the gold standard of whey protein with a
Mhm.
plant protein as long as we designed it correctly with the right stack of proteins. We could approximate it. Would maybe not quite as good, but for those of us who want to be vegan or vegetarian, it would satisfy. Well,
Yes.
I thought collagen was nonsense because when Solgar started first making collagen powders years ago, they used to do a non-hydrolyzed collagen, and for
Mm.
some people, it was causing problems in the gut.
Yeah.
Its absorption rate, its protein efficiency
Very
rate,
low.
somewhere in the low 20s.
Very low. Correct.
But hydrolyzed is different. So when collagen first came back out, I mean, I heard Dr. Axe talk about it at a lecture. NeoCell was selling it like crazy in a 10 grams scoop. It was only my Brazilian customers from Long Branch and Newark that were buying it. I go, "Why are you buying it?" "Oh, it helps with your skin." And I said to myself, "Well, they keep buying it, so it must work." I go, "Does it really work?" "Oh, yeah, it's really big in Brazil." So I one day because I worked here, I got a free jar of collagen that someone left lying around. I started taking it. I don't take it for my skin. You can tell it's far too late for me for that. But
Come
what
on.
I do take it for
Uh-huh.
is my joints, my mobility.
Joints.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yep. So I
Mhm.
take collagen every day, at least 5 or 6 days a week. You know, sometimes when I'm have to run out the house in the morning and I can't have it, I don't move
Uh-huh.
as well the next day, especially if I, played golf or went for a long walk, right? So
That's right.
th th so, you know, there's the customer experience is the ultimate decider. So
Uh-huh.
what we're trying to do with the science, whether it's consumer science, you know, studying what consumers are buying and watching growth rates, or
Mhm.
it's the science of medicine, or it's the science of understanding the history of an herb's use in traditional medicine. Whatever study we do, it doesn't matter if it doesn't work for the customer. If they don't feel a difference in a relatively short period of time, preferably by the end of the first container, even more preferably within a week.
Yes, and that's a high bar for
It's a high
supplements,
bar.
right? A lot of the studies are multiple weeks
Right,
of consumption. That's why we always advocate for a routine, right? You have to have a routine. You kind of have
right.
to your body needs to know what to do with the
Mhm.
nutrients.
Right.
Um, and you actually helped me understand how to take capsules, something as simple as how to take capsules. We were talking about how you position even your neck and your mouth to take a capsule. I think the audience would love to understand that because there's a lot of us who struggle with taking capsules,
Yeah.
and and if there's an easier way to do that, or at least to understand the science or the physics behind it, that would be fantastic. Can you explain that one
Yeah.
again?
The old-fashioned multivitamin was really a B complex with a big ego. They wanted to have a lot of B complex because that was the thing they had known about, and they'd have a lot of other things, so it'd have a lot of minerals, so it was always a big pill.
Mm,
And, when people took multiple pills I mean, when I first started working for this little company I worked for it was headquartered in South Jersey, but we were in Miami, uh,
mm.
Pennsylvania, Delaware, New Jersey, and New York. They used to sell pill crushers.
Yes.
And then
Oh,
one day
yeah.
it occurred yeah, so I asked I saw these wackos who work for me. Now I'm one of them, but
Right.
I looked down on them at the time.
Mm,
They would swallow 5 to 10 pills at a time. I said, "How's that possible without choking?" And they go, "Well, you don't swallow the pill, you swallow the water." And then as I did the
mm,
science of it, because I never believe anything. I'm a natural skeptic, right?
mm.
Even though I didn't study science, it makes me a
Sure.
natural scientist because I don't believe anything anybody says. I gotta know why. I gotta know if it's true, right? So it turns out, you have this thing called the drowner's reflex. So if an unconscious person gets thrown in a pool, there's no water in the lungs for a minute to a minute and a half because as
Mhm,
soon as the water hits the throat will involuntarily close. Now, if
mhm,
the injury's that severe, that might not happen, but it usually takes a minute for water to start to go into the lung. Now, if somebody starts screaming underwater, the water goes in sooner because the drowner
mhm.
reflex is overridden by the brain. Well, the
Mm.
same thing happens when people struggle with pills. And many of your customers are also required to take medications, right? So they don't just
Right.
have this problem with vitamins and minerals. They may also have it for other things. So what I used to teach people is the position. In
Mhm.
CPR, you put the head back to keep the airway
Yeah.
open. But when you're
Mhm.
eating, you don't want to keep the airway open. A true
Right.
fact is one of the leading causes of a choking death is laughing. Because when you laugh with food in your mouth, you're going like this. And it gives the opportunity for the brain not to know that a piece of food is about to go down the wrong pipe. And we've all
Mhm.
done that where we started laughing and we thought, oh, something
Yeah.
bad's about to happen here. It
Oh,
might
yeah.
even be with a liquid, right?
Mhm.
So just the opposite. You take whatever pill or pills you want to swallow, put them in your mouth, but fill the inside of your mouth with water and
Mhm.
concentrate with your head forward, the position you would eat in like this.
Mhm.
Concentrate on swallowing the water. And like Moby Dick and Pinocchio, you're going to swallow the pills without them touching the side of your throat. They're just going to go down.
Amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing. This episode of the Balterra Wellness podcast is brought to you by Endless Thesis Holdings. Endless Thesis, where we publish exciting books like Beyond the Lab Coats. We consult in the food, beverage, and dietary supplement industries, and we spawn companies like Balterra Incorporated. Endless Thesis, where curiosity never ends. Now back to our show. And I'm gonna ask one more thing before I open it up to Eric, who is not in the supplement space, and he, I'm sure, has just very basic questions for you. But I have
Sure.
one more, which is around innovation and future possibilities. I'm very interested in the new type of ingredients that are coming out. Ashwagandha used to be the new one. It's no longer a new
Right.
ingredient. Shatavari is one that is hot. Do you know anything about those types of
Yeah.
ingredients, or you have an opinion on things like
Y-
shatavari and how
Well,
that could play a role in humans' wellness?
yeah. First off, there's a lot of study now to support what the Ayurvedic have always known about Shilajit and
Shilajit,
Shatavari. So
Shilajit, fantastic.
we are
Mhm.
actually, Jose, and you don't know this yet, or you may know it if you talk to Ali. Um, we are rolling out a Shitavari. It's called Shivari 4. It's a clinically studied form of Shitavari, and it's studied for one
Uh-huh.
particular part of the Shitavari that does very specific things for hormonal imbalance and even
Okay.
perimenopause and menopause. So I think you're going to
All
be
right.
excited by that. And there are some collateral studies on Shitavari for reproductive health, sexual
Mhm.
desire, female
Mhm.
desire disorder counterbalance. I think it's a nice stack with ashwagandha if a woman is struggling in reproductive health. And
Mm.
there's similar studies on the form of the Shilajit that we'll be coming out with, right? So we're
Okay.
excited about both of them, and that's us leaning in, as you even suggested early in this podcast, leaning into the idea that, hey, the answers may already exist. We just lack the science to explain why. But as soon as we have the
Exactly.
science to explain why, that might not be the gold standard double-blind clinical study, but we know of its historic use, and now we know of the why. We also have a
Exactly.
great active that we use in a bunch of products that you should take a look at over time. But the ingredient we get is called shodan. And you mentioned
Mhm.
ashwagandha. One of the
Mhm.
problems with ashwagandha is the most marketing is done by a company whose standardized extract is 5%.
Mhm.
So when you look at the clinical studies from that company, you have to take 2 to 3 pills a day. And
Yeah.
we know that compliance goes down once you get over 2 pills. And
Correct.
there's so many studies from that company that say 2 to 3 pills a day. I don't care if it's for stress, uh, reproductive health, sperm motility, anxiety, whatever it might be,
Mhm.
women's reproductive health and desire as well. Well, we have an ingredient, a hero active, and we could talk about it uh, at some point in the future. It's called Shodan, and
Sure.
it's standardized for 35% with analyzed, meaning one pill
Wow.
100 milligrams of this provides 7 times more than 100 milligrams of
Oh,
the other
standard.
trademarked ingredient whose name I won't
Mhm.
say because I
Yeah.
don't believe in bashing competition. But we don't have exclusive use of this, but we saw
Yeah.
the studies on it, we said, "This is amazing stuff." What it allows us to do is it allows us to put a Shodan in a stress formula, or a Shodan in a male reproductive health formula, or a Shodan in a
Mhm.
female hormonal balance formula. and get the benefits of the anxiolytic things by also providing something that might help with reproductive or sexual desire. So it's very interesting, this stuff.
Love it.
I'd say another active I'm excited about, and I want to share it with you because we just had another great meeting. We've been planning this for over a year and a half. It's a product called Redicose. I want you to read up on it
Educate.
before.
Yes.
Redicose.
Yes.
It's an extract from mulberry leaf that
That's right.
slows down the breakdown of complex sugars and simple starches into
Love it.
glucose.
Yep.
And it basically lowers the sugar effect of a high carb meal by about 42% and keeps the simple sugars and starches, simple starches and complex sugars that could act as prebiotics in their functional prebiotic form. We've all met somebody who had stomach discomfort from what was thought to be a good prebiotic, only to find out they got belly bloat, which means it broke down
Yep.
the sugar too quick. So even if
Yes.
you're eating a healthy fiber source like oat bran, it makes sure that it stays um, in that healthy form longer into the intestinal tract, so it actually does what it's supposed to do as a fiber source and doesn't break down into glucose too soon.
And from what I understand, any red glucose that's not used goes into the urine system,
Yeah, no, there's
which is
no
easy to
yeah, it's
remove.
not fat soluble, it's water soluble, like you
Mm.
said. But the more important thing is they've studied for discomfort. You know what it
Mhm.
also does? This is so exciting. It raises naturally GLP-1, not the production of it, but by
Yes.
keeping the food in the intestinal in longer in both the stomach and the intestine. There's two places the body makes GLP-1. One is at the bottom of the stomach and then down the digestive tract in the colon. And what it does is it helps with the natural production of GLP-1 through how God and Mother Nature meant it to be, which is from food, not some
Yes.
mechanistic action otherwise. And then what I also love about it is there's another one that I can't pronounce, so I'm going to call it GIP. GIP is the one that makes
Mm.
you feel hunger. So it
Mhm.
raises GLP-1 and it drops
GIP.
GIP. And
Mhm.
we're excited. We're coming out with another hero active called Caroline. We don't have enough time to talk about that today, but we'll talk about it again in the future. But the Caroline is a fiber source that
Okay.
also adds to that feeling of satiety and sugar
Mhm.
control. So we're
Excellent.
stacking the two together in a formula called Apicet. It's just those two actives. There's nothing else in it. We put a little vanilla in it, so it still tastes natural or neutral, so you
Mhm.
could put
Mhm.
it in anything.
Fantastic. I
Yeah.
love your innovations, and I love how you guys are thinking about it.
Yeah.
Um, so, with that, Eric, we probably have enough time for maybe one or two questions depending. So I'll pass it over to you.
When I go to the store and I look at the label, how do I know what is a good product?
Okay, so just give me an example of something you might be interested in, Eric.
I don't know, creatine.
Okay,
Oh,
so if you're buying an unflavored creatine, turn it around, Jose. We can show
okay.
the customer what they should look for. Below the supplement facts panel, which is government required, it says other ingredients. What does it say there, Eric?
None.
That's a good one. And it's same thing on your unflavored collagen, right, Jose?
Correct. Yeah.
So if you're only buying a single ingredient product, you want as few other ingredients as possible, and to use the term we've already used in another fashion, the gold standard is none, right?
Mhm.
Like I want the thing as clean as I can get it, and a lot of people make a big deal about, well, we can't use red dye number whatever again, and then we're going to do this instead, but they might use something that's still it's not adding to the formula. Now, if you're buying a flavored product, you have to be a little more a little more open, but still
Mhm.
as few actives as possible. Jose, you don't happen to have one of the plant proteins in within reach. I knew he would.
Of
He loves
course.
this product. Turn the front around. All right. Yeah, only 7 ingredients. And if we turn it around to look at the SFP, look at what's below it, it's all stuff you would recognize as food, not as something else, right? Or a flavor, but not like even the salt we use to enhance the flavor so we can put less other things in it to make it taste good. By the way, that's the chef's kiss, right? It's the pinch of salt,
That's
right?
right.
That's
It
right.
fixes
My
everything.
son studied at the French Culinary Institute in New York. He doesn't do that now because he learned he couldn't have a family and be a chef. But he actually worked for Thomas Keller, and he goes,
Ooh.
"You know, Dad, you really like dark chocolate and sea salt. Now I know why. It brings out the flavor. Like even desserts taste better if there's a little sea salt in
A
it, right?
little salt fixes
That's it.
everything.
That's it. That's it.
Well, one more question then. Ed, you mentioned mesh size. Why should I care about mesh size? I don't know anything about it.
You shouldn't actually. You should only care that when you mix it, you see it floating like in the water after you're done stirring it or shaking it. And we look at the bottom, there'll be some residue, but it won't be much. That's what you want to look
Yes.
for. And when you mix your protein drink, you're not worried about mesh size at all. This is something we have to worry about on the manufacturing side, like how it blends.
Yep.
But it's not really a consumer concern. So, but the
Mhm.
real critical part is when you mix it. If you have a whole bunch on the bottom, you might try mixing it with warmer water and then adding the ice later.
So you're kind of
Okay.
diluting it?
No, the warmer water makes anything go into, it's actually suspension, not solubility, but we call it solubility for the consumer. But it actually makes it work better. So if you have a little bit of residue more than you want, you can always just do it in warm water and then add 2 or 3 ice cubes.
Yeah, it's the same thing as sugar, Eric. Sugar
Yeah.
dissolves
Yeah.
better with heat.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
The,
Yeah. Even room temperature, it'll dissolve better than cold. I happen to drink my water at room temperature because I heard this thing years ago. It said people should drink warm water when they need to get cold, counter the heat. No, it's the other way around. If you
warm
drink
water.
cold water when it's hot out, you actually body will work harder to reduce the temperature of the cold water. So you're not supposed to drink ice cold water on a hot day. So
So
my
drinking
wife
out of a
always asks me,
hose.
but I drink my water at whatever temperature it's at. I don't refrigerate it.
So
Yeah.
drinking out of a hose like we used to is perfectly good because that was hot. That water
You
coming
could
out of that hose was not.
you could get mononucleosis.
It was hot.
I knew a lot of kids who got that without their first kiss, so I think you could get mine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ed, with less than 10 minutes left, one of the topics that came out in our last podcast was an interesting one, but a funny one. If superheroes were taking supplements, what supplements would they be taking? And we had an interesting discussion on superheroes and supplementation.
Oh,
So,
wow.
any perspective on superheroes and what type of supplements they should or could be taking based on who they are?
Well, if I was Superman, I would take anti-inflammatories because he's constantly slamming into things and getting blown up by nuclear bombs and having kryptonite. And I can't imagine, even though he's Superman, he doesn't need to have some good inflammatory resolution, right? So I would
Beautiful.
suggest to him 2 scoops of collagen and some turmeric. That would be my
Love it.
suggestion. Yeah,
Love it. Thank you
yeah.
so much, Ed. It's been a pleasure talking to you. I love talking science with someone who has such a breadth of knowledge and history. So appreciate it very much. And for the audience out there, this has been an episode of Balterra Wellness Podcast. Stay balanced, stay clear. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for listening to the Balterra Wellness Basics and Advanced podcast. Your host for this episode was José Barbosa. We thank our guest, Edward O'Toole, for joining us on the show. Production, editing, and technical support were provided by Eric Santana. This episode was brought to you by Endless Thesis Holdings and Balterra Incorporated. This podcast is for educational and informational purposes only and is not medical advice. Always consult a qualified healthcare professional regarding any health concerns or before starting any supplement, diet, or wellness program. These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.